Hi, welcome back to Cosmic and Body Horror. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. The Edge of the Universe by J.D. Oakleaf. Chapter 1. Settling in. I suddenly awoke coughing, choking and struggling to breathe to strong winds and rain lashing my face, with some sort of fragrant metallic taste suffocating my mouth. I squinted through my stinging eyes and tried to inhale through the constant bombardment of water. I shivered and found my senses enough to push of the wet rock I was laying on with my frozen hands to see a dark environment. The sound of a rough seas crashed against the rocks and swept up onto the pier and land, almost submerging them. The night was dark and only illuminated by a sweeping glow, allowing me to see the faint outline of the pier and land before me. Towards the edge of the pier, an everlasting darkness could only be seen. I dragged my slow, cold body closer onto the land, at least to drag my feet off the pier. For some reason I felt safer to move away from the dark sea and onto firm, solid ground. However, where even was I? My head throbbed and spiraled as a flash of me in the shower was my last memory, but the constant whipping of water and wind thrust me back into my instincts rather than logic. Quickly scanning around the immediate area, I found the source of the glow, although it was a piercing light when looking directly at it. A lighthouse towered above me on what I was guessing was the coastline, but was hard to see the base because of a thick fog surrounding me. What a terrible storm! The lights of the lighthouse were on as the warm glow from the windows gleamed through the fog. Black fog? Where am I? Where am I? Thoughts passed through my head as I tried to pull myself to my feet. My body was hard and rigid, frozen to the blood. Conveniently, I was wearing a raincoat and wellies as if I worked on a fishing boat. How was I wearing this? Cuddling my own body and noticing that the raincoat was no good at this point, as all of what I was wearing was wet through. I squelched and stumbled forward as I tried to make my way to the lighthouse. I slid across the smooth stone of the lighthouse until I found the door, and the warm glow of the innard spread onto my face as I peered through. The round window. The storm continued to beat down, but I was slightly sheltered by the lighthouse. I hammered with my frozen hand against the door, scared that my hand would shatter like ice. "Hello," I screamed through the window on the door. I shouted louder, thinking the storm was drowning me out. "Hello, anyone? Can I please come in?" I shouted while continuing to bang. I returned my hand to my armpit to find no warmth. I glanced through the misty window. I needed to get in. I was so cold. Where am I? I tried the door handle, thinking I'd apologize to whoever later, as I was just seeking warmth. I rattled it and the door clunked and loosened. Hope was revitalized in me from the small victory as the door creaked open, and was then promptly ripped out of my hand as the strong gales flung the door open. I practically fell into the lighthouse, noticing the warmth like fire scalding every inch of my skin. My blood boiled and my heart raced from the sudden shock of change to my environment, but I jumped up and grabbed the door and with all of my strength slammed and pushed the door shut. Silence. Immediate silence. Slowly, as if I was waking up for the second time again, the dull, muffled sound rattled against the walls of the lighthouse. The waves echoed further away, almost comforting. My body warmed, but I was still dripping wet. I turned to look inside the room, wiping my face from the floppy wet hair to see the bottom floor of the lighthouse. Empty. Well, not empty, empty. The room was filled with bits and bobs, creating a warm, welcoming lounge. Kitchen, but it was devoid of life. I was going to search, but I could tell from the glance or the feeling that no one was here. A warm fire crackled and burned in the fireplace, The kettle was hot and steamy in the kitchenette. Comfortable sofas and chairs rested on a soft carpet, but the room was mostly covered in books. Different sizes and tattered papers littered the nearby table along with more random books. Where am I? I stripped my wet clothes, which I didn't recognize, and dried off a little by the toasty fire. I could have been overstepping my boundaries, but I also put on the nearby shirt and jeans resting on the chair closest the fire. I wasn't exactly going to explore the lighthouse in the nuddy. I explored the lighthouse quickly, but nothing particularly special other than the emptiness and the fact I was even here. There was a bathroom in the room next to the lounge, and the floor above was a bedroom. Above that it was just storage and access to the top of the lighthouse, but with the current storm I didn't fancy going back out there. Quite yet. The lights were on in all of the lighthouse, which meant there was power at least, and it looked as if there was someone here. Things all left half done, in particular the recently boiled kettle. Did they go outside? I returned to the lounge feeling the warm tingle reach the furthest points of my body. I felt much better inside, which gave me time to think about what happened. The storm continued to rage on outside. The windows rattled like pouring gravel, and the murmured wind's howl reverberated through the lighthouse. I moved my attention to the dining table with an open book adjacent to the single dining room chair. It looked like an old leather-bound book, and even had a pen and quill to the right of it. The pages were stained and crinkled and looked as if it should be on exhibit in a museum. Passing my hand across the open page to feel a sandy, coarse texture, I noticed 3 blocks of writing with the ink to the right, from the top to the middle of the page. I couldn't read it. It was written in a language I couldn't recognize, using a completely different alphabet to what I knew. I turned the page to find more of the same writing and some small doodles of creatures. Maybe? I noticed the writing on other parchments spread around the room. I couldn't exactly read any of it, but I found a couple pages with mostly sketches and doodles. Something to look at, I guess. It was mostly of different vegetation and animals that seemed altogether unfamiliar. Before I knew it, the comforting warmth of the lighthouse sent me off to sleep right here at the dining table. Where am I? I woke much later, noticing the silence outside. It was still dark outside, but the sound of the storm had gone. I couldn't tell how much time had passed, but the fire had reduced to just embers. No one was still here. I made my way outside to have a little check after putting on my now dry raincoat. I pulled the door open, noticing it to be much heavier than I realized, and peeked outside. The sea was calm, and the soothing sounds of small waves sweeping up the stone faces and under the pier were presented before me. It echoed slightly as well. It was still very dark, and scanning beyond the pier it was still like a void. Was it still foggy or cloudy? There were no stars in the distance toward the sea. I was now stood outside looking toward the spot I woke up before. I left the door open in fear it might not open again. Raising an immense amount of confidence, I decided to have a little search around the lighthouse. What intrigued me was a faint glow which trickled around the edge of the lighthouse, possibly even brighter. I slowly strolled around the lighthouse, still a little unsteady on my feet, while my hand grazed the rough wall so it would never be too far from me. When I arrived far enough around the lighthouse and the small garage that was to the side of it, my eyes glistened with incomprehensible confusion and wonder. What was I looking at? A soundless orchestra of light and color from a light show of stars, flaming suns, darting asteroids, spiraling galaxies, all twinkling and dancing before me in a multitude of color. A universe! How did I miss this when I arrived? Was the fog and weather so distracting I didn't see it? Asteroids flew through the cosmos, crashing into planets. Suns radiated light in every direction to the surrounding planets. The galaxies calmly spun as a chaos of light and color, merging with other galaxies, while stars died and imploded, destroying all around. Every detail of the universe could be seen before me like a theater of the cosmos. I walked closer to what I could see, and what's more, I could see the edge looking from left to right to up to down. My mind struggled to comprehend the sight. It wasn't a picture, but I could see every detail from an edge's perspective as it curved around. I could see the full rocky island I was on, and as one side was a universe, the other was completely empty void except the lighthouse and the random sea. Where am I? I shuffled to the edge of island, mesmerized by the complexity and detail of the universe I could see. It stretched as far as my vision stretched. Reaching the edge, I uncontrollably raised my hand out and tried to touch, only to be presented with an invisible barrier that rippled to the touch but was quite hard. Thinking about it, this was a blessing that there was a barrier, because how would I breathe? But then how was I even breathing now? What was I experiencing? After I managed to take my eyes away from the screensaver that was before me, I explored the tiny island. Other than rocks, there was only the lighthouse that continued to shine into the void, and the pier that pointed out into the void. There was no light beyond, just an endless darkness accompanied by a sea. How was there even rain before? I came to the shoreline of the island and stared at the dark water. Dipping my handle below the shallow waves, the water was actually black in color as my hand disappeared and felt almost soapy. It may not have been water. It also smelt metallic with a hint of wood, not the usual salty sea smell I was expecting. Where am I? I returned to the lighthouse after my brief adventure. I figured it was the safest place to be, but didn't have the foggiest idea on what to do next. I simply relit the fire and paced around the room, made myself a hot cup of tea, presumably tea, and just went into a lost daydream. I decided to scan the books and papers to look for a hint of anything, even though I couldn't read anything. Luckily, in a few of the documents, the author was an artist and had done sketches and doodles of their surroundings. I recognized the island and the vast universe next to it. I also began to see patterns in the big old book on the table. It was starting to look like some sort of diary. Also, going back far enough, I noticed that the alphabet changed and the handwriting. It was completely different in form, suggesting more than one person stayed here. Was it always one person? The thing that cast the most dread in me, though, was the dark, shadowy person-like figure with uncolored circles for eyes that both authors had sketched on various occasions, and only differing in style slightly each time. One drawing had the dark-figured tower over the lighthouse, where another looked as if it was an attempt of a scale image in comparison to the lighthouse. Something they saw in the void, perhaps. I stayed in the lighthouse for whatever amount of time passed. I had no reference of time here since it remained constantly dark. I slept when I was tired, and I tried to read the books when I was awake. This was my routine. I felt safer in the lighthouse, and the cabinets in the kitchen were stocked with food, so I didn't have to worry about starving at this immediate effect. I looked into methods of keeping time as well. I thought about counting the number of fires I got through or something, but I didn't think I'd keep count, or what was the actual point. I didn't exactly know how long a fire would be. I couldn't compare it to a day or something. There was no need at the moment other than a means to comfort my mind with a constant factor. Sleeping and eating when I felt I needed to seemed enough. I was uncomfortable and uncertain about the outside surroundings, so I continued to stay in my quiet, cozy little lighthouse, resting in the void at the edge of the universe, looking at all the documents I could find and sleeping in the soft, comfortable bed upstairs. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Void. After an uncountable amount of time passed, I found myself sitting on the pier looking into the void, glancing back at the universe every so often. I don't know why this time I decided to stare into nothing, but I happened to do so anyway. I'd been venturing out of the lighthouse a little more of late. I was beginning to feel stiff and stagnant, holed up trying to read the books all the time, so I wanted a little fresh air. If fresh air is what you can call it. Just wasn't indoors, I guess. Still didn't understand this place, nor understand where I was. Couldn't call it anything else other than at the literal edge of the universe, or known universe rather. Didn't exactly know what was beyond the sea leading into the void, if anything. I listened to the calm waves sweeping and bubbling underneath the pier long enough to hear the sudden change in rhythm. I glared into the darkness, not expecting much, until a faint line of a silhouette began to appear. Rather than a void of no color, there was something creating a dark shadow, something solid. It was the sudden movement of the darkness I saw to begin with, and after focusing for so long, I began to see shape. The faint glow from the universe differentiated between void and something, and I could see the figure of a person. As I followed up the body to where the head was, I could see the reflection of the universe glowing from the eyes of the colossus giant. It was just like the sketches I had seen in the books inside. It was too dark to see the details of the body other than a shade, but the eyes reflected light. I cowered before what I was seeing and remained completely still, too frozen and scared to move. My arms wrapped around my legs as I gaped at the figure. Was it looking at me? It towered high, and even at a distance I could see it was bigger than anything around. The silhouette swayed as it made its way closer to the lighthouse, shifting the water and creating larger waves on the shore. It stopped to the left of the lighthouse. Still, I could only see a shade. It appeared it wasn't paying any attention to me or the lighthouse. From the faint line I could see of the creature, it was quite bulky but still had long-reaching arms, as it looked as if it scooped some of the water up into its palm. No sound echoed other than the splashing of the waves as it went about its business. I stared at it as it stared at its palm with the water inside. It raised its arm high close to the edge of the universe, where I could see the faint color of grays, browns and greens on its fingers. The water in its palm suddenly spiraled into a spherical shape and sparked around the edges. It crackled like a warm campfire, but remained dark in color with the orange sparks leaking of the edges. The creature extended its palm to the very edge of the universe and released the ball. It floated and passed through the edge of the universe. The moment it passed through, a brilliant flash erupted, causing me to close my eyes briefly. I opened them to see a sun in place of the ball of water. I could see the details of the flaming sun without being blinded, and it began floating into the universe. Presumably pleased with its work, the creature turned and strolled back into the void as the sun floated further into the universe. Within stunning moments, the creature had returned into the darkness of the void, leaving me dumbfounded on the shore. So, it can create suns. I said to myself, knowing only I could hear it. I spent more time outside after that occasion to catch another glimpse of the creature from the void. I recorded what I had saw within the journal, noticing similarities to the previous entries from the previous residents. I obviously didn't have a way to count the days yet, so I simply recorded a mark in an available book I found for every time I slept. So, after 7 sleeps while sitting on the pier, the creator reappeared. I had given it the name of the creator because of the sun incident. This time, as I spotted it within the void again, it stood silently watching the universe. It didn't move except for once stirring its arm within the sea. Difficult to see, but I could still see the reflection of the universe glisten in its eyes. After standing still for such a long time, the creator moved back to the edge of the universe and again formed objects from the sea. Rocks, asteroids or planets. Not a sun this time, but something with more of a rock form, as they also glided further into the universe. Again, after finishing whatever work the creator was up to, it made its way back into the void. A further 7 sleeps later, the creator returned yet again. Well, I noticed it return. It could have returned when I was asleep one time, but I didn't have any means to record when I was away. This occasion, the creator simply stood and watched again and returned to the void without doing anything this time. The process happened fairly often. The amount of sleeps happened to change often for every appearance of the creator, and the activities also varied. Most of the time it would come and add something to the universe after it created it from the sea, but on other occasions it would just stand in the distance staring at the universe, as if the universe was its personal diorama, which it probably was thinking about it. The universe was its playbox. Every time the creator came back close to the lighthouse, it would never take me or the lighthouse, for that matter, into account. Did it even notice me? I didn't exactly want it to notice me, but I had quite a few questions I wanted to ask, and the Creator was the only other living thing I had encountered here. I waited in my usual spot on the pier when the Creator appeared again. It stood a distance away from the lighthouse like normal and watched the universe. But after only moments of its return, I noticed frantic movement within the shadows. Its glowing eyes flickered and darted left to right as if it was in a panic. The water splashed about where the legs of the Creator should be. It was running, parallel to the universe, as I watched the Creator run further into the void, but in a direction I've never seen it go. Slightly comically horrifying to see something so large run away. A large booming grumble, then roar that echoed into a slight wail sound. The ground rumbled and the sea rippled. I shuffled slightly back up the pier, ready to retreat to my hopefully safe haven in the lighthouse. The waves sloshed and splashed angrily as I heard, and barely saw the waves break in the distance of the void. A shadow I hadn't seen before raised out of the sea. Not like the Creator. This was larger and more terrifying. It extended far into the sky of the void, and if there was a sun of some sort, I'm sure it would have been blocked out. Again, it was difficult to see the detail, but from the shadow, it was almost serpent-like. This Leviathan presence instilled pure fear into me as its body kept raising into the air. The rest of the body had still not appeared, but looking to the base, I noticed a wave. A big wave. The beast had created a tsunami as it broke through the surface. I immediately ran for the lighthouse, but the wave also towered over my island's height, with the serpent extending even further. The wave was fast approaching, but there was not much I could do. As I turned to see the wave almost upon the island, it reflected and refracted the light of the universe and lighthouse into a shimmering dance, like fireflies dancing in a night sky. I gripped the door frame to the lighthouse, prepared to jump inside as the wave covered my view of the serpent. As it came close to the lighthouse, it crashed into an invisible force. The light of the lighthouse? Like water on a glass window, it flowed around the light and was even repelled as the force reversed. It trickled down the invisible force that was the edge of the light. I sighed relief as I released my scrunched toes and loosened my grip on the doorframe until I realized the Leviathan still lingering there. The dark shadow was now falling back toward the sea like a whale who breaches and falls again. It was difficult to see since the spots of blurs in my vision from the sudden reflection of light the wave caused, but I heard the giant creature crash back into the sea, creating an even bigger wave. The wave was twice as big and fast as it again crashed into the edge of the light and harmlessly battered against the edge of the universe. The waves, still rough, splashed and begun to settle as I heard the growling whale song again. The waves fell to a ripple, and I was submerged in my usual silence of the void. I'd found myself on the pier again without realizing, squinting into the dark void, but nothing. I fell to my knees and chuckled. That was terrifying, I whimpered. After the Leviathan event, I recorded it within the journal and drew the best sketch I could. Quite appropriately named it the Leviathan as well. The Creator also returned and continued with its universe project after a few sleeps. Was it a hierarchy I witnessed? Was the Leviathan higher up on the food chain? Now that it was gone, the Creator was free to do as it wanted, but not once did it acknowledge the lighthouse. The lighthouse acted like some sort of barrier from the Leviathan, so maybe it couldn't be seen, but I couldn't exactly confirm such things unless the Leviathan returned. A dreaded thought. The longer I stayed at the lighthouse, the more adapted I became. I was pretty good at spotting the Creator within the void now, as if my eyes became clearer or something, but I couldn't quite tell if that was true. But as I got better, I realized there wasn't just one Creator. In fact, I noticed 3 types. They never appeared at the same time, but I definitely started to notice his differences to the outlines of the Creators. The first one, or at least the first I saw maybe, I think, it was bulky in size and had the most proportionate body compared to me. The second was thin and lanky and taller than the first, while the last one had the smallest of bodies compared to the other 2, but the largest inhuman head. I made sketches of all of them, the best I could within the journal, trying to keep them all to scale, as best I could, using the lighthouse as a rough reference. Despite the differences I noticed, all the creators did the same thing of creating something and sending it into the universe, not once paying me any attention, which I guess gave me all the time to sit on the pier and watch them. Although I started with fear, the creators now gave me a fraction of peace and calm while watching them. Not completely alone, I guess. I continued my little life at the lighthouse without too much event until after one sleep cycle I exited the lighthouse with a fresh cup of coffee. Blowing on it to cool down, I exited and headed to my usual spot at the pier, but was greeted with something different. I froze in place, leaving my coffee to burn my lip, but too stunned to react to anything else. Beyond the pier, but not too far into the sea of the void, was the largest eye I have ever seen. It glowed a dim yellow, bathing the lighthouse and the surrounding area in a dim orange hue. Noticing the shadow of the Leviathan's head, it rested on the surface of the water. Its body extended far to the right and continued beyond the curve of the edge of the universe. The eye's circumference alone was larger than the lighthouse, and from its glow I could see the dark scale-like texture around the eyelid. I don't know how long I stood frozen nor how long the Leviathan laid staring into the universe, but after I had unknowingly dropped my coffee, the black pupil diverted its gaze down toward the lighthouse. And me? I still didn't move as I saw the reflection of myself stood on the island within the pupil. Although it looked in my direction, the reflection in the eye told me the focus of the Leviathan's sight. In the center was the light from the lighthouse, not me, thankfully, but I wasn't exactly a safe distance from it. It had been so long since I encountered another living thing this close, but a sense of emotion from the Leviathan's eye. Hatred, anger, as if it cursed the very light from the lighthouse that it could not reach from some unknown force. It stared for a while until it broke its gaze, and as if turning of a night light, the yellow glow from the eye vanished, and I could see a clear reflection of my lighthouse island and the dazzling universe behind. The light sparkled in the eye until the edges of the shadow began to close in around the reflection. The Leviathan closed its eye and then quietly and calmly began to swim away. Its head submerged into the sea, and the body trailed behind as it slithered in parallel to the universe and my island. Although quiet, its gigantic body swept large waves toward the island, but harmlessly splashed against the lighthouse light barrier. A loud echo from the Leviathan reverberated and rippled the sea as it submerged further. It was giant, and it took a long time, I think a long time for the full body to pass by. As the shadow of the tail reached the lighthouse, it lifted high up as the Leviathan came to the end of its dive. How deep the sea must have been. However, looking at the tail from the shadow I could see, it looked familiar in shape. In fact, it looked like a hand with 5 fingers and a thumb extended at the end. Its tail was a long arm with a hand, as I saw the last moments before it plopped under the seawater. Peace returned to the void again, while I cleaned up the mess I made with the coffee. I think I will stay inside the lighthouse until my next sleep cycle and record what I saw. Chapter 3. Losing It. I sipped at the herbal tea I had found in the top cabinet of the kitchen while I made doodles and logged the details of my time before the next sleep cycle. "How was your day?" I said out loud to myself. Not much to report, like usual. One of the creators had been by and made some lovely stars. No sign of the Leviathan for at least 60 sleep cycles now. Been wondering to forward my plan and check the water, I said, as I wrote with a little doodle of a creator. "Thanks very much," I responded, and took a comforting sip of tea. I wandered upstairs to my bedroom and tidied the bedsheets and put some of my clothes into the washing basket. There was a functioning washing machine to my pleasure, and even though I'm guessing it didn't help as much, I still hung up my clothes outside the lighthouse on the available clothing line. The washing machine and shower did bring up the thought of where did the water come from. It was around this time when I wanted to check where the pipe lead that Gregory visited me. He came and knocked at the door before I thought about calling. Did I even have a phone? Nevertheless, Gregory was here and he knew everything about plumbing. He'd let me watch since I didn't have much else to do. Oddly, if you asked for finer details about Gregory, I couldn't tell you. He was blue in color and wore the greasiest pair of overalls, but had many stories of his school days. "Pass us the lamp," Gregory said after pulling up a floorboard to see where the pipe was going. I was a sort of assistant as we trailed the pipe, which eventually led to an impassable wall, and we had no tool to get through it. Such a shame, but from what I can see on this side, the pipes work fine. Landlord wants to manage the rest, I guess. Gregory pat me on the shoulder. "Maybe," I responded, wondering if I could find anything outside. After the work with the pipes were finished, Gregory stopped visiting. No work for him, but I did miss his company until one day I found a note on the front door from him apologizing, and he had other work to do. Did promise a pint sometime, though. Gutted that the pint had to wait. After the next sleep cycle, I made myself to the pier with a cup of tea to see Maurice. He was fishing off the edge like usual. "Catch anything?" I asked. Maurice simply glanced back at me, chewing his lip, and calmly shook his head. He was a man of few words and turned back toward the sea. I placed his tea by him and sat to the side. "Gregory won't be about for a while. He's got work," I explained my sullen outlook. "Who be tha?" Maurice asked without much interest. Maurice's face hid behind a large greying beard, and his yellow hat and dungarees drew your attention away from his finer features. He chewed his pipe often but never smoked out of it. I shrugged of the Gregory topic. "How do you get here, Maurice? Why fish here?" "Boat, big catch," he answered both questions efficiently, or lazily as possible. "Where's your boat?" I asked. "Over yonder." He shortly answered again, but giving no direction to yonder. "What's the big catch?" I asked about the second point. "Biggest thing you'd ever see," he answered without ever looking away from the sea. I think I know what you're referring to." I stood up and patted myself down. "Think you'd need something bigger than that fishing rod, though. Anyway, good talk. Leave your cup by the front door of the lighthouse later, or join me for dinner. Take care." I made my way back to the lighthouse, glancing back to see Maurice unmoved and unchanged. After the next sleep cycle, I noticed nothing by the front door, so made my way down to the pier again to find Maurice gone and a full cup of cold tea. I sat at my desk, twiddling with my pencil as I tried to forget about my aching headache. I rubbed my tired eyes to see I had been writing in the journal about Gregory and Maurice amongst other people from the neighborhood. I didn't remember writing it, but it was interesting to read about them. I'd been having a few blackouts of late, where things around the lighthouse had changed when I couldn't remember doing them. I'd also felt like my time asleep was longer, but I couldn't be sure on it. However, luckily, I'd always remember to record in the journal. Some entries I remembered doing, and some I didn't. There had also been some entries from my visiting friends, thanking me for the lovely stay. One entry, though, was from a Dr. Kaplar, which drew some concern in my mind. I'd never met this person, not that I could recall anyway. From what I could diagnose, the patient is losing mental stability and trying to cure the loneliness. A new environment or hobby might help. Dr. Kaplar had written and signed in the journal. Not knowing about the doctor, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. I went outside with my fresh laundry after feeling better from my coffee. I felt chores as therapeutic and occupied my mind while I lived here, so I quite liked it when I had a big load of laundry. While I wafted out a bedsheet, I heard a voice trail from my laundry line. "Feeling okay, hun?" The voice of Madeline was immediately recognized. I turned to face her. She was an older woman from the neighborhood and often was wearing her work clothes from the dry cleaners. "A little tired and a slight headache, but generally fine," I replied. Using the fabric softener, I recommended I see. She smelled the already hung sheets. "Yeah, thanks." I smiled, still feeling a little drowsy, actually, Maddie. "You don't happen to know a Dr. Kaplar, do you?" She scratched her frayed, frizzy ginger hair, looking a little puzzled. "I can't say for sure, hun. He new to the neighborhood." "Neighborhood? No, I don't think so." I wondered where the neighborhood actually was. "Not sure then, Louv, why you ask?" She helped me fold the bedding. "No particular reason. Just a weird note. Don't worry about it. Again I tried to shake the thought. She helped me with the rest of the laundry before waving goodbye and heading back home to beyond the lighthouse. After another blackout, I found myself on the pier. I rubbed my cool arms and strolled back to the lighthouse. The fire was out when I arrived, so I had to spend a little time getting the wood and relighting it. After the crackling fire was confidently going, I checked my journal to see new entries. Interestingly, there was one from Maurice saying he saw the catch he was after, only a matter of time until he catches it. I thought that was nice, but hopefully he realized he needed something bigger to catch it. There was also another entry from Dr. Kapler. The subject has created many characters, most notably the ones most active at the moment would be Maurice, Maddie and Dr. Kapler. I swallowed a large stone bothering my chest, as I noticed the handwriting of Dr. Kapler and Maurice was the same. What's more, it was the same as mine. A tear ran down my cheek as I tried to shake the horrible feeling rising. I slapped myself and pushed the journal aside and decided to go to bed. I woke up and came downstairs to find the journal on the floor with Dr. Kapler stood by the desk. He wore a typical white doctor's coat and bore a striking resemblance to me, as if I was looking in the mirror. "Have you finally accepted it?" Dr. Kapler said quite sternly. "What?" I responded, glancing at the journal. "It's not healthy. You are giving food to these characters and not properly eating. You're wasting away." Dr. Kapler poked my bony, skinny arm. Looking at myself, I could see a very thin body, almost skeletal. I clenched my weakened fist to notice a lack of power. "I eat," I demanded. "Sometimes you eat, but most of the time you black out while being a character. You don't even eat that food you give to yourself." "Wake up," Dr. Kapler said as he turned into a thin mist and out of existence. I stared, looking at my reflection in the water of the cup I was holding. I slapped and scratched my head as I whimpered for a moment as Dr. Kapler or myself made me realize I was still alone. I sniffled and wiped my running nose as I pulled the journal back to its original position on the desk. The scratchings and tales of my other characters littered the recent pages, all in my handwriting but signed by the character. Going back a few pages, I noticed it wasn't the first time. I had realized that I was creating characters twice before and made a note about it. So for the third time I made another note that I came to realization, feeling the loneliness return quickly with a written passage. I spent the next few sleeps feeding myself, sitting outside with the universe as my view. Strength began to return slowly, but my mood became grumpy. I was no longer unknowingly talking to myself, and was very aware I was the only one here talking. Leaning on the wall behind the lighthouse, I nibbled on some biscuit while watching a star collapse in on itself. It was like an imploding firework with random sparkles from the edge as the color wrapped and spiraled into an abyssal center. A creator came into my peripheral as I watched it do the usual creation of some universe-like thing. Sipping my water, I coughed. "Hey." Like normal, no reaction from the creator. "Please." I begged for a reaction, but the creator finished its work and ventured back into the void. I presumed the creator was real. Well, at least not one of my created characters, since I never wrote anything from its perspective. And it had been around, at least hopefully, since before I started losing my head. I wiped my eyes from the daily brewing of tears while I sat in the darkness under the humble glow of the lighthouse in a touching distance of a living universe, but still out of reach. Trapped at the very edge without a way out of the darkness, my mood became lazy. Promising I'd shave after the next sleep, or write in the journal, or study the alien language in the books to only lose enthusiasm at the last minute, and coming to this seating place to stare at the universe. I knew I wasn't achieving anything, and nothing would change if I gave up and did nothing, but I still couldn't surmise a fraction of energy when needed. Why couldn't I do it? I saw Maurice again by the pier a few sleeps later. He tried to tell me about the catch, but I simply shook my head and covered my ears. "You're not there. Please kindly leave," I said to myself over and over again until he disappeared. I was trying to not lose myself to an illusion of my mind again. Despite probably feeling happier, I didn't like the thought of not being in control, I began leaving more notes than usual in the journal to keep my mind from swaying. But like before, stories began to appear of episodes of the other characters at the lighthouse. My depression must hit a certain point and take me to a more peaceful world with others about, although I was creating personae again. One journal entry piqued my interest and highlighted a secret hatch to the top of the lighthouse. I explored the bedroom, which I thought was the highest point I could reach in the lighthouse, and exactly where the journal mentioned there was a small hatch hidden in the darkest corner of the room. I brought a chair over to stand on and reached and grabbed the small handle. I gave it a jiggle to notice its stiffness. I pushed and pulled to find the direction I needed to go, until I happened to find the sweet spot, and the handle clicked a locking mechanism. The hatch became loose and swung down, almost pushing me off my chair. No ladder, but I was tall enough to reach the rim of the new opening and pull myself up. I used the very top of the chair as a kick-off point and slumped my weight through the gap and onto the cool surface above. It was an empty room with a stairway to the light. No features or things were in the room. It was dark, but there was a glow from the excess light from the lighthouse. I followed the stairway around, hugging the wall to avoid falling from the stairway without a railing. Reaching the top, I arrived outside onto a railed balcony. I averted my eyes outward because of the bright light and saw the scenery I'd come to be familiar with, the universe to one side and then the endless void to the other. Despite the height I gained as I leaned over the railing, there wasn't much else to see but for a control panel, much like a house's fuse box on the base of the wall below the glass where the beam of light came from. It was a simple box which had an on and off lever supposedly for the lighthouse. "Flip it," an unknown voice said, being yet another character to my repertoire. However, I was curious and I felt like satisfying that curiosity. I leant down and flipped the switch to off. The lighthouse was immediately plunged into shade, and only the glow to the universe was present. It was interesting to see how much light the lighthouse produced as towards the void it was darker than normal and somehow eerily quieter. The beam of the lighthouse no longer tickled the edges of the waves, which made it harder to see. It was also as if the surrounding light that formed an invisible barrier was also now vacant. After a few moments of darkness, I began to feel slightly uncomfortable, so I bent down again to turn the lighthouse on. But as I leant forward, the humming echo of the Leviathan reverberated the lighthouse louder than ever before. I stood back up and strained my eyes into the void. The universe reflected on top the sea and shifted a little more violently. The sea on the horizon distorted as the starlight bent and rotated. It formed into a large bulging wave, getting closer and closer to the lighthouse. The wave started to break, revealing the shadow of the Leviathan's head gaining speed towards me, the waves parting, creating their very own tidal waves. The sound of impending doom in the darkness was terrifying, all the more escalated as the Leviathan stretched its mouth open. I temporarily squinted as bright light coming from the gaping mouth blinded me. Stretched open, I could see more of the Leviathan than I'd like to have. Its large maw of teeth were noticeably not teeth, but arms and hands waving, wafting the raining tides further into the lit mouth, some holding debris and unrecognized objects. The light was a spiraling orange rotation toward a dark center, similar to how I'd imagine a black hole or wormhole of some sort. Screams and moans of noise raged in pain along the landscape of fleshy arms. The raging chaos ended to a point where nothing existed. I felt that my very insides were being ripped and pulled towards the gravitation of the Leviathan's gaping mouth. The Leviathan would consume everything. With the brief visual of the terrifying open mouth of the Leviathan, the only thing my body knew to do was to turn the lighthouse back on. I swiped my hand hard at the control panel and flipped the switch that I felt like I broke my finger. The lighthouse light burst brilliantly, creating its blinding light. The Leviathan, only mere moments from the island, snapped its mouth close and recoiled as the invisible barrier the lighthouse created stopped it in its swim. The waves crashed at the light barrier as the Leviathan circled and returned to the void sea, leaving a very disturbed sea in its wake. A trailing scream of anger and pain submerged into the muffled sea. I vomited and slumped back onto my rear with no concern of the mess I made all over my stunned body. My hand held the railing above me as my confused mind searched for answers. It felt like a part of me had been ripped away as I was left with an emptiness. The waves settled and returned to the quiet void. Fear held me where I was without the strength to move. I don't know how long I remained stunned until I heard, "Maybe it would be best not to catch the big one after all," Maurice said, leaning over the railing. I half-heartedly grinned and blacked out for longest time on record with only fear on my mind, more than I'd like to realize. Chapter 4. The Boatmaster. I had lost an uncountable number of sleeps since my last blackout. I was capable of making a rough estimate from the diary entries, but it felt much longer since my mind had been properly present. It was nice to read my character's concern for me, as if I had someone worried about me but made me a little concerned, if my made-up personae were concerned. A new pressing issue arose, which is why myself started resurfacing more often, and that was my dangerous levels of food. I nibbled on a rice cracker of one of the few things I had left. Water still ran from the taps, but the cupboards were empty, and the storage shed outside, which at the time I was thankful for finding, was also empty. I mostly had biscuits and a few snacks left, but that didn't change the fact that starvation was a real possibility at this point. "I told you this had happened," Mr. Tom exclaimed, and noted in the journal a long time ago. I couldn't exactly do much about the situation either, which was annoying. I was stuck on this little island with a lighthouse. I even sat with Maurice one time and tried my hand at fishing, but even I can tell there's nothing to catch except the Leviathan, if even possible. Wouldn't be called a normal sea. Before I slept, I laid on my bed with my stomach rumbling and only a cup of water to satisfy me. I dozed in and out of sleep when I began to hear thumping. Something heavy kept being dropped on the floor. I presumed it was imagined in my dreams, but after waking up and going outside, I noticed a stack of crates on the usually empty pier. I hesitantly approached them, unsure what to expect. There were many crates stacked as high as me and a few sacks around the base. I looked around the horizon of the pier but noticed nothing out of the ordinary. I found the closest crate and cautiously opened it. The lid was loose and easy to lift, and inside the crate were various vegetables. In fact, checking the sacks and crates, it was all food of various types, as if I just had a supermarket delivery. "What?" I exclaimed with uncertainty. While I pondered about the arrival of the food, I unpacked and stored it in the lighthouse and shed. I was left with some empty crates which I left at the pier, but how did the food get here? Someone must have brought it here. The tapping during my bedtime, I heard, must have been the unloading of the food, but that would also mean another person was around. I waited longer at the pier for a couple of sleeps, but predictably nothing out of the ordinary. I had food again, so I had a small feast of roasted beef and fresh vegetables. At least they tasted fresh. In fact, just realizing nothing seemed to go off, as if it had an unlimited shelf life. I wasn't surprised. The mystery had less intrigue to everything that happened until now. I was more interested in how the food arrived and who brought it. Nothing beyond from what was normal here happened over the many sleeps. I ate meals, did laundry, spoke to my imaginary friends, and generally lived my hermit lifestyle. I used most of my free time to browse through the notes that were left behind. I mostly focused on the sketches, and then used the writing underneath to find matches in various other places. There was familiarity in what was written, as if they experienced the same things I did, but still lacked the complete understanding. There were many sketches of things I hadn't seen or felt I witnessed, so I wasn't really sure what I was looking for relating to the food from the pier. There were no images of the crates, but there were a few of a boat, a small sketched row boat and a figure inside it. I looked at the text around the image, but the image was all I could go on. Considering I basically ran out of food, I concluded that the boat would arrive with supplies to keep me fed. Since I wasn't sure, I decided to wait for the food to once again come to an end, which would take about as long as the total time I had been on the island so far. I didn't want to just throw the food away just in case. Many sleeps passed until my food reserves began to deplete again. I saw the Leviathan again, but only as it passed by, but nothing exciting beyond my own mind getting confused once in a while. When my food was at a low amount, I began camping out by the pier in case the boat came while I slept outside. I thought that this could scare the boat in some way, so eventually pulled it back to the lighthouse door. I made a bed of cushions through the open door to react at any moment on my possible theory. When my food came to the moment of dangerously low again, I was napping through the door with my rice crackers nearby when I heard the thudding from long ago. I shot up straight in my makeshift bed, rubbed my eyes and ran toward the pier. As I got closer, I saw the shadows of a few crates on the pier and others in a boat, and one human shape picking up a crate from the boat. "Hey," I said a little surprisingly. I had waited for so long and I couldn't think of anything else. The figure glided without a step onto the pier and faced me while holding the crate. The person was completely covered under a cloak that I couldn't see any features other than a dark shadow. The hands holding the crate were at least hand shape, but they were covered with gloves and a weird wispy black smoke emanating from the openings of the cloak. "Who are you?" I trembled more than I expected, unsure if I should be prepared for a fight. Whoever this was, they were delivering food, so maybe not. The boatmaster stood silently analyzing me until they decided to put the crate down on top of another. They turned, and without paying me any attention, glided eerily back to the boat, with the action of a single step, and picked up another crate. They continued with the delivery work, not once caring of my existence, until they finished and faced me once again. "Can I ask a question? Where are we? Where do you come from?" I began berating the boatmaster. The boatmaster tilted their head in what best looked like confusion until they shook their head. The boatmaster turned and glided so swiftly that they were back on the boat and holding an oar of some sort that manifested out of nowhere. The boatmaster wasted no time on pushing off from the pier. The boat glided effortlessly away, cutting through the waves without trouble. "Wait!" I shouted as I fumbled and almost stepped off the pier. The boatmaster did not wait as he got further and further away until he passed the dark like fog in the distance. The bright lantern at the front of the boat highlighted the boatmaster's position as they proceeded into the void. I watched the whole time, helplessly stood on the pier next to the fresh batch of crates. I noted and drew the boatmaster as clear as I could in the journal later, also marking that food would be delivered upon the visit. I failed at any communication, but I wasn't exactly going anywhere, so I waited till next time, not as if I could go anywhere. I waited once again until the food ran out, still fearing starvation if I was to run out. However, once again as my food was depleting, I clocked the glow in the distance from the kitchen window. I strolled outside to witness the boatmaster's arrival. This time I was already waiting on the pier, ready to greet the boatmaster. The boat calmly landed at the pier full of crates and resources for the island. The boatmaster paused and I think stared at me until I stepped back slightly to give them enough space to work. As soon as I gave some room, the boatmaster eerily twitched to the first box and grasped it, and then suddenly, like a glitch, tweaked onto the pier where they dropped the first crate. It was like watching a shadow bend and twitch to quick changes in the direction of light. "Can I help?" I politely offered to start small in my questioning. No reaction came from the boatmaster. They just continued to work. "Was it a safe trip across the sea?" I continued trying to ask questions, but each question I asked was ignored. At one point I tried to grab the shoulder of the boatmaster, but my hand just passed through. The boatmaster did freeze for a moment and recoiled slightly as if I disheveled something. "Sorry," I quickly whispered to allow the boatmaster to get back to work. As the boatmaster came to the end of their job and ignored my questions, I was running out of options. The boatmaster unloaded the last crate, and as they did, I rashly jumped into the boat to adamantly stand my ground. The boatmaster dropped the last box and snapped to the edge of pier, staring at me in the boat. The shadow seemed more agitated than before. A little unsure on what to do now, I held my ground and crossed my arms. Did I even want to be in the boat? The boatmaster twitched in place more erratically until they outstretched their arm and extended a single wispy finger pointing toward the lighthouse. I shook my head. "No, I'm staying in the boat with you." I didn't know where the boat went, or even if it would be better than here, but at least I'd have the silent company of the boatmaster as we ventured into the void. The boatmaster lowered their arm and slowly shook their head. A raspy, strained voice spluttered from the boatmaster. The first time I finally raised some speech from the boatmaster. The boatmaster strained yet again like a spluttering exhaust. I returned the silent treatment and held my ground, or boat rather. The boatmaster stood in silence for a bit after the last words were shared, until they suddenly, with a glitch in space, popped into the boat next to me. Although I felt nothing, the boatmaster glitched into a position. I thought there'd be contact. But regardless, I lost my footing in surprise and I fell backward, unfortunately, toward the sea. I plunged into the surprisingly deep sea off from the pier and was immediately filled with the ice-cold chill from the sea. My senses were impaired as I opened my eyes to the darkness of the sea. I choked on the water as I inhaled slightly from falling back into the sea, and in mere moments I felt dread. I froze in action, unable to move, but at the same time I felt like I was violently lashing. I was in panic as I was attacked and ripped apart. Screams and howls of other people and things pierced my ears. Images of lives and creation as well as death and destruction flashed through my head as what felt like an implosion. Uncountable amounts of hands grabbed hold of me trying to get their piece. Amongst the chaos currently ravaging me, I suddenly focused on a tight grip clasping my shoulder and immediately felt more real than what was around me. I was suddenly yanked upward. I broke the surface of the water, calming the chaos into dead silence as I landed on something solid. I chocked and coughed up the black water, and my fuzzy vision began to realign. Looking toward my rescuer, the boatmaster stood silently staring in the boat. They were very strong, considering the boatmaster had managed to pull me up and throw me over the boat onto the safety of the pier. "Thank you," I wheezed, unsure to what my experience just was. I checked that my body was indeed intact and physically fine. Certainly planted a large amount of fear to ever go back in that dark water. "Not Raridi," the boatmaster gasped to me. "For what?" I tried my best to reply, but I was exhausted. The boatmaster gave no answer and pushed off back toward the void while I was left weak on the pier. It was a good while I laid on the pier while trying to pick myself back up. It was strange to feel as though my whole body was numb and drained. I eventually began to tingle and drag my cold body away from the pier. Looking back at the dark sea, I felt dread and heard a sort of whisper. As thinking about what I experienced brought a sharp pain to my head, I shook away the thoughts and heaved myself back to the lighthouse. I felt relatively weak for the next 2 sleeps. I only left the lighthouse to pick up the resources left on the pier, but I felt fear from going outside now. I stayed wrapped up in a comfy blanket on the sofa, reading through the texts and writing in the journal. I mentioned that the boatmaster pulled me out of the chaos of the sea. Didn't want me dead, at least I knew, but no answer as to why I was here. I started to regain my usual strength over the next few sleeps, but also begun to feel itchy. I'd experience unbearable itching fits on occasion where I'd scratch my arms until they bled. Accompanied with the itching, the whispers I heard from the sea grew louder but incomprehensible. I also saw smoky, shadowy black markings across my skin, spreading like a rash whenever I entered an itching fit. But as the fit passed, no change was physically noticeable except for the grazes I had left. After a rather bad itching fit, I picked up my confidence and I made my way to the sea with a cup in hand. The whispering grew louder the closer I got to the sea. I felt an invisible force pulling me, but I knew I didn't want to take a dip in the water again. I leant down and got a full cup of the water. I then hurried back to the lighthouse. I moved all the texts and papers of the table and placed the full glass cup on the table alone in the center. The water was dark black, just like I knew, but it swirled and danced rather than settling in a stationary cup. I stared at the water, unsure what to do, when I began to see something in the surface of the water. It rippled, and small images of faces and random objects could be seen. I rubbed my eyes, and back to a black liquid it went. The water spun slowly around, while I wondered what the strange images I kept seeing was. The water began to ripple violently, just as I was possibly leading into a daydream. The surface began to bubble, so I touched the cup and there was no heat to feel. After a few more moments of bubbling, to my horror, the water started to stretch upward out of the glass. I took a step back. The water began to morph into fingers and then a hand-like shape, while the wrist ended where the cup began. The rest of the arm continued to grow out of the top of the glass until the elbow, where I stepped further back. I became speechless. The dark black arm flailed around slightly, as if it was wafting a wasp away, until it again extended further out up to the shoulder. There was nothing strange to the shape of the arm, but it gave nothing but unease seeing it extend out of the cup. After its extension to the shoulder, the color and texture of the arm began to ripple and change. It clearly faded into skin until it looked like a severed arm balancing on top the cup. That was it for me. I stepped in close and swiped the cup off the table with the erratically flailing arm. The cup smashed, but the arm remained with what looked like black goop rather than water at the point of the shoulder. The arm wriggled and spun around on the floor until its palm managed to find a grasp and begun dragging itself aimlessly across the floor. It managed to pull itself a good meter across the floor until it stopped and begun to shake in place. In a small amount of time, the color faded, and the arm essentially dissolved back into a puddle of black water on the floor. I found myself sitting on the floor, panting in fear and confusion, staring at the puddle of water. Quickly gathering myself, I rushed to mop up the water before anything more were to happen. Sponging all of the remaining water into a bucket, I rushed outside and threw it back into the sea, and rushed back inside with no intention of leaving for a good while. I spent a lot of sleeps inside the lighthouse. If I went outside, the whispering from the sea intensified, which along with its creepy vibe just made me think that some more wrangling arms would crawl out of the sea. Also, while looking at the notes and my experience with the creator's actions, the sea was capable of some sort of creation. Not entirely sure how, but it definitely made an arm, and the creators outside make suns and stars. Uncertain on its trigger. One cycle when I was awake. While studying and itching like mad, there was a sudden loud knock at the door. I stared at the door, waiting for a further sound. "Hello?" I hesitantly said. Thinking that I've started to go mad again, I peeked outside the kitchen window to no avail. Couldn't get the angle to see if someone was at the front door. The door was pounded once again, followed with a little rattle of the door itself. I jumped slightly. The door wasn't locked, so it wasn't as if the person couldn't just open it and let themselves in. Was it safe? I shuffled up to the door and grasped hold of the door handle. I took an inward breath just before I twisted the handle and pulled the door open. I opened the door wide to find the boatmaster stood on the porch lighthouse. "Hello?" I said again, after my fear surprisingly lifted from what was nothing but a stranger on my porch. Without speaking, the boatmaster stepped inside without their usual glitchiness. In fact, they moved more human than before, and there was no wispy smoke trickling off the gaps in their clothing. They looked around the room for an unknown moment. I was stocked with food. Wouldn't have predicted them to be here, let alone at the lighthouse. I quickly glanced outside to see the lantern of the usual boat, but no visible crates on the dark pier. I looked back at the boatmaster to find them staring at me. I closed the door. "Sue, would you like a cup of tea?" I asked without much to actually say. The boatmaster shook their head. "I'm checking on you." The boatmaster sounded much less raspy, and the sentences were smoother and clearer than before. He also sounded very familiar from the words he spoke. "Checking on me? Is that one of your jobs?" My urge to ask questions swelled. The boatmaster chuckled and then pulled back the hood covering his face. "Maurice?" I exclaimed as I immediately matched the familiar voice to the face. "Aye, how are you faring?" Maurice asked, as if I didn't have other questions or doubted of his existence entirely. So the boatmaster was another imaginary character like you all. Be brilliant. Where'd the food come from? I was sick of the mysteries. Calm down, lad. The boatmaster and I, yes, are one of the same, and at the end of it we are real. As much as I can be, at least, Maurice tried to explain and maybe comfort me as he guided me to the closest seat to sit down. I made up, Maurice. I know I did. I was on the verge of tears. I didn't want to have to yet again question my understanding of my surroundings. I guess you're not ready yet, but you've definitely changed. You've rather abruptly experienced the seas. That wouldn't have been comfortable, Maurice explained at the same time as adding more questions. Why am I here? I asked weakly with little else to say. Maurice smiled and calmly shook his head. I could tell he wasn't going to explain much, even if he existed, and I'd wake up in realization that I just had another episode. You'll come to realize eventually. That being said, I've only recently come into existence. I'm limited on what I know and can do, Maurice said while stroking his thick grey beard. Thinking about my recent experience with the seawater. The black water? See, almost there. Maurice patted my back. Almost there. I exhaustedly sighed. So it's some kind of training. I'd rather just go home? That is sadly an impossibility. Yet again could also become possible. Just take care of yourself. You'll eventually see the full picture. Maurice stood up calmly, and as if he had said all that was needed. Not enough, in my opinion. I fumbled to my feet to escort the already leaving Maurice. You know, you seem different. Kinda? You're normally quite blunt. Maurice raised his hood over his head and began to fiddle with his mask, while I opened the door slowly. It's how you perceived me this time. Guess you needed it. Take care. With his final words, Maurice glided back toward the pier. I didn't follow him, but watched his entire journey to the boat from the door. I felt exhausted, and I didn't feel I had the energy to attempt an escape, nor was I going to get any more information from Maurice. As he got closer to the boat, the usual twitchy glitchiness of the boatmaster I knew reappeared. The smoky black wisps leaked out of the boatmaster as they glitched into the boat. My perception range limit. Did I apply the friendly Maurice to better understand the boatmaster? I was left yet again on my little lighthouse island, surprisingly feeling better after the visit from Maurice, or the boatmaster rather. It wasn't much, but it was the most I've ever gotten to an explanation since being here. I still had no answer, but I was at least acknowledged, even if it may have been my own mind. The whispering from the sea didn't get a better. It continued along with the itching. Sleep was a comfort and a break from it. However, after a while it sounded as if the whispering begun to make sense. I was finding logic in the words, or at least focus. Sometimes I'd hear set phrases or full conversations between the ghosts of the voices. I sometimes even heard formulae or languages I didn't recognize but understood they were being said. I learned to get used to the itching for the most part. It had gone from an insane scratch to a small niggle. All of it felt like I was adapting to this place. I was becoming used to living at the edge of the universe. I felt more pleasure observing the wondrous view of the universe. My hunger weakened as I felt I could eat less, and my body remained fit. I became at calm. I don't know how much time passed during this age of calmness. It was a pleasant change from feeling weak and tired. However, the one thing that did continue was my loneliness. I still felt that strongly, with nothing but the occasional visits of my imaginary characters to feed that pain. After a sleep, just as I awoke, I felt a familiar sensation, yet a sensation I can't actually remember sensing. I got up and made my way to the pier to see the glow of the lantern on the boatmaster's boat appear from the horizon of the void. I could oddly feel his approach. He ported and glitched off the boat onto the pier. "Good trip," I said calmly, welcoming a cargoless boatmaster. "Makes sense since I knew I was stocked with food." Standing before me, the boatmaster settled on a form and pulled the hood down, revealing Maurice again. "You're looking well." "I feel better, I stated while checking myself. "Will I get answers upon this visit?" "Not from me." "I have a duty, yes, but I'm essentially from you." Maurice said in his confusing way. Well, can I go out there and find the answers? I asked, pointing toward the void, obviously knowing I can't go the other way. I don't know, but I feel you're capable of making the trip now, Maurice answered. Why am I ready now? Unsure definitively what changed from before, Maurice looked at me confused. I don't know really, but I'm here at a different time I should be. So you may come in the boat with me? I nodded and felt a slight tingle of excitement. Maurice spoke again, but be warned, the journey is treacherous. I knew it wouldn't be safe, especially with that Leviathan out there, but I wasn't finding answers at the lighthouse. I needed to move on and feel like I had a purpose again. The lighthouse had many mysteries, but they were out of my perception with the little information I had. All that was here for me was to loop around from insanity to sane while a feature tickled my interest, but gave no answers. I'm not exactly living, stuck here at the lighthouse, so I'll take my chances with you. I committed to the idea of leaving. Maurice stroked his beard and looked around toward the lighthouse. Fair. But don't confuse or compare comfort to what you don't know. Here you are safe from all harm. Apart from your own mind, I guess. I shook my head and adamantly said, I'm going. Okay then. Maurice complied without argument. Is there anything I need to bring? Rationally thinking about the trip but realizing I don't exactly have much other than the food stored here. Should I take a journal or book to document? Something to nibble on is quite fine, but no, you won't be needing anything. Maurice grinned and patted my shoulder, initiating the process to leave. Okay, well, I guess I'll meet you by the boat, I said a little hesitantly from the sudden speed things were going. Maurice nodded in acceptance and showed himself back down to the boat from the small ways we had walked in conversation. It could have been a trick of the light, but he appeared to become more wispy as he made his way to the boat. The usual glitchiness began to return. I got back to the lighthouse and I scanned the interior of my home, unsure what I was looking for. I decided to change and wash to at least feel fresh before going, and I rummaged around the kitchen for some snack-like things that fit into the bag I had by the bed. Feeling a little fresher and ready, I ventured outside to see Maurice, or at least now looking like the boatmaster again waiting at the pier. I closed the lighthouse door, peeking inside one last time for my final farewells. The door had no means to lock it, so I was leaving the lighthouse as I had found it. I left a journal of notes on the dining table within just in case another poor soul wound up here and needed some guidance. But like the books that I had available, there was no guarantee they could even read my written word. It was something at least. As I made my way to the pier, I often glanced back at the lighthouse and the sprawling universe, absorbing those last moments of wonder and the slight feeling of loss. I stood before the boatmaster, now completely back to his smoky form and lacking any of the characteristics from Maurice. The boatmaster merely pointed to the boat and ushered me on as if there was some need of haste. I slowly fumbled my way onto the boat. It sloshed from side to side on my first step while I managed to fall my way to the seat. The boatmaster merely watched rather than helped and offered no resistance to me getting on the boat this time. Did the correct thing so far. The boat was a simple wooden rowboat that dipped up and down from the gentle sea waves. Not designed for sea travel from the looks. The sloshing water was a reminder to avoid going in the sea at all costs. The boatmaster glided effortlessly onto the back of the boat without disturbing the rhythm of the rocking boat. The boatmaster raised their arms to have a large oar appear within them, with the same texture as the boatmaster's smoky form. The boatmaster dipped the end of the oar into the water from the rear of the boat and looked beyond me toward the open sea within the void. The boatmaster paused as if frozen in action. Realizing the boatmaster was waiting for me being ready, I said, "I'm good to go. This small boat is okay for the journey, right?" Without answering my question, the boatmaster pushed off from the pier with hardly any action, but the boat skimmed forward, cutting through the coastal waves. I braced myself from the rocky start. I stared beyond the boatmaster back toward the lighthouse and the expansive universe spreading all across the sky. I was finally leaving. The scene looked peaceful and yet stunning, with the miraculous stars and planets behind the humble, quiet lighthouse. In my own head, I said goodbye, and thanks to the lighthouse which offered me safety during my stay at the edge of the universe. I looked forward to the opposing dark void of nothing, seeing the waves disappear within the black mist. The future destination looked dark and less comfortable to what I was leaving behind, but it was forward at least, rather than feeling stuck. Approaching the never-ending darkness that towered higher and further than my sight, I was struck down with fear. I worried that the Leviathan would eat us whole from the dark water. I held my breath in a worrying preparation about what was to come, but for now, I am leaving the edge of the universe to see what is beyond the void, to wherever the boatmaster comes from. The next unfortunate soul to come to the lighthouse can read this in my last note. Take care. You are safe at the lighthouse as long as you keep the light running. I hoped I was on to better things as the boat breached the edge of the void and succumbed to the surrounding darkness. End of The Edge of the Universe by J.D. Oakleaf. This is the end of the story. Tell us what you think in the comment section. Please subscribe and ring the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we release new content. If you want to support us, consider joining our channel membership. You will get instant early access to more than 100 stories before their release. This is the only way to support our channel.